Tonight, known cases are up in at least 30 states, especially across the Sun Belt. These states you see here, some that raced to reopen, are now retreating. Others have hit pause. Coronavirus cases in the U.S. have now reached more than 2.5 million. The death toll above 125,000. That's the worst.
Woke nom nom. So with the raising number of cases, you know, we see it in the news every day. They keep talking about Texas and Florida especially. But, you know, we can see here that they're not lying. The cases are going up in the United States of America. But I want to kind of break it down a little bit to kind of argue against what the media is telling you. Just off the rip, I'm not a statistician. I'm not a mathematician. But I do know how to look at charts and compare two things. I have that much intelligence. Now, I may be missing a few variables, but this is my argument against what the media is telling you about these cases and why you may not want to take these cases into consideration when it comes to how you handle you dealing with COVID-19. Let's get started. So of course, these are the cases. It gets spiked up. Most states started opening around this time, which is between middle of April to middle of May. But let's look at a few of the red states that they like to talk about. Let's start with Georgia. Of course, Georgia spiked. I live in Georgia, and we opened, I believe it was either mid-April or early May, around this area. So as we reopened more and more, we saw spikes. Now I want to look at what the media doesn't really like to talk about, but they do show the total amount is the deaths. We look at the deaths, it's pretty stable. There's not really much of an increase here. So one would argue that the cases don't really affect how deadly the virus is. Now let's go back to cases. Let's look at Florida, which is another state we hear in the media a lot. Florida is also a red state as of now, but it is basically a swing state. It can go both Democrat and Republican. That's a big spike. That's almost 10,000 cases. Okay, so with the higher number of cases, we should see a higher number of deaths to correlate, right? Doesn't seem that way. It seems to be just like Georgia, where the deaths practically stay about the same. So let's go back to cases. Let's look at Texas. We love to talk about Texas. Texas is a big ass state. Very big spike in cases. Not as much as Florida, but a big spike nonetheless. Again, let's look at the deaths. Hasn't really changed much. Now one could argue, okay, well, deaths, usually they're not sure what the death is. It's going to take, I believe it's 1 to 8 weeks before they show the deaths as a COVID death. Well, I would argue in Georgia, we opened around here. Let's say about April 24th. It's been 6-8 weeks since then, or at least coming close to that. And there's not really a spike in deaths. So I would argue that new cases doesn't necessarily mean that the death. It's actually interesting to see how we're seeing more people with this virus, but less people dying. Now, one can argue a bunch of things like just because people are dying doesn't mean people are suffering. The hospitals are still overwhelmed. There's arguments against both sides. What I do want to argue is how the lockdowns have affected people. What we're going to do is going to look at the CDC, and this goes over the deaths by age, this table right here. So this table right here goes over the deaths. Over here, we got the age group. This is the COVID-19 deaths. This is the total amount of deaths in general. So like car accidents, heart disease, blah, blah, blah. Starts from February 1st, ends around June 20th. As you can see, as people tend to be older, their chances of dying has increased. But what we can see here is around the age of below 65 is pretty low, right? If I was to add all these numbers up, which I did here, it comes out to about 20.8 thousand. And over here, 65 to 74, just in this age bracket, it's 22,000. Now, above that is 28,000 for 75 to 84, and 85 and over is 35,000. So what is my argument here? We shut down the economy in America, put people in lockdowns, but this virus is affecting mostly the elderly. Now, it sounds fucked up because I'm basically saying economy is over people and saying that I'm moral, but I'm not here to argue that whether it's moral or not. What I'm here to argue is that we're literally destroying our economy for a virus when we should be quarantine mostly the elderly because they're affected mostly by the virus. We should quarantine the elderly and allow the option for people in this age group 25 to 65 to just not work. We should make protections for those people who don't feel safe to work and allow those people to stay home and allow the people who are elderly to stay home until there's a vaccine, until it's safe to go to work. Now, who knows when that will be? But I think those are the people we should keep accountable because the same way how these elderly people lives matter, this group of people, the working class age, matters. People will have to pay their bills, they have to pay their credit cards, their car loans, their mortgage. You know, okay, so you don't have COVID-19, but now you're starving, or now you're in so much debt that you can't afford to pay a medical bill that may pop up in the future. You don't have a safety net. You can't build an emergency fund. So that's a lot of stress. And that may lead to future hospitalizations for other things or medical conditions for other things. You're unemployed because of COVID and can't find another job. Well, tough shit. At least you don't have COVID, but you're broke as shit right now. It's an argument that's both on a morality standpoint and an economical standpoint that's tough to really 100% side with the other. But for the sake of this video, I'm mostly likely going to talk about the economical effects of COVID and these lockdowns. What exactly is the working range for these age groups? And I have the answer to that. This is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These numbers are in the thousands. Let me scroll down a bit. These numbers are in the thousands. It basically goes over all the occupations of the age groups that they collected. This is in 2019. Keep that in mind. So the total number of people working over the age of 16 is about 157 million. You can see here, like we just went over, the CDC, after 65, the death toll for COVID really starts to go up. But from 65 and over, only makes up 10 million people. Now, I'm going to include 16 to 19 years old because these are also children who are supposed to be in school and we kept them in lockdown. So let's say 15 million people. We can see here that 142 million Americans are affected by these lockdowns. I feel that governors and mayors should look at these stats and look at these numbers and maybe say, hey, over the age of 65, we'll send you a stipend, kind of like what they're doing now with the $600 a week, and allow those people to stay home until there's a vaccine, because these are the people who are mostly affected according to the CDC chart. These people are dying in drastic numbers. Now, it's easier to give $600 to these people than give $600 to all these hundreds of millions of Americans. You can sustain this a lot better. You can sustain this. But if you have these people not working, that means less taxes being collected, which means these stimulus checks ain't going to last long. You're going to eventually have to start printing more and more money because there's no tax dollars being collected to fund these stimulus checks. These governors who are continuing these lockdowns should take into consideration is that the chances of a person dying is very low under the age of 65. But you should give them the option to stay home and not be affected by the workforce, and allow these people older than 65 to collect a check until there is a vaccine ready available. And that's my argument. I'm not saying whether you're against COVID or not. I'm not telling you to not practice social distancing. Personally, I think you should practice social distancing, whether there's a virus or not. If you're sick, you should wear a face mask, to prevent other people from getting sick. If you're sick, you should stay home. If you know you have COVID, don't be an asshole. But to make life harder for almost 150 million Americans, that just doesn't make much sense to me.